Good evening, everyone. So as Jamie mentioned, my name's John Straumann. It's pronounced Straumann. It's Swiss. You guys were kind of sharing fun facts before, so I'll share probably my favorite fun fact. My grandfather is from Switzerland. He's from a little town called Basel, Switzerland. If anyone watches tennis, they might know that that's also the hometown of one Roger Federer, who's one of the best tennis players in history. And I started playing tennis about 5 years ago, and unfortunately, I think Roger got all the tennis talent in Switzerland because I have none. So that's the other thing I would say is you asked what I would do with an extra day of the month. I'd play tennis in the morning and golf in the afternoon. So those are two of my hobbies. And it's kind of funny, too. You all were talking about cold. So I live in Florida, and it's been very cold here for us. I'm sitting here freezing right now. And the only reason I'm even here and not on a tennis court is because it's so cold. So I guess it's good because we're here doing this meeting. But most nights after 5, you can find me on a tennis court. So that's something I love to do. I'm out there every day that I can, but and I know people from the really cold states probably don't like hearing me say it's cold when it's 50 degrees, but my hands are so cold right now, I can barely use them. I'm freezing. So it's really nice to meet everyone, and thanks for the time today. So as Jamie mentioned, what I built is I had a customer come to me. Oh, I should give you some history. So I'm a 3-time boomerang back at Microsoft for about 6 months. This is my 3rd time, obviously, 3-time boomerang. I started back in 2000, back when Dynamics 365 was actually called CRM, and it was version 1. I was one of the first TSs at Microsoft for CRM. I was one of the first MVPs for CRM after I left Microsoft, and I was in my own business for about 7 years doing all CRM deployments. And then I spent 3 years out at Corp as a technical product manager for CRM as well. For the past 3 years, I actually transitioned into automation. So I took a job with Blue Prism, which, as you may know, is enterprise robotic process automation. They actually say they invented the term robotic process automation. So I've done a lot of enterprise automations, helped a lot of customers with automation solutions, and it's really become a passion. I think that the Power Platform and Power Automate have so much potential, and it's the big reason why when a recruiter called me a few months ago and said, "Are you interested in coming back to Microsoft?" I said, "Well, yeah, sure." And so really happy to be back. It's funny, a lot of the demos I did at Blue Prism involved Dynamics 365. So I would do automations and use Dynamics 365 as the backend. And so what happened here is when I was at Blue Prism, a company approached me and said, "Hey, we're doing this thing with COVID cards, so the COVID vaccination cards. And because we're America and we don't like to standardize, we're still the only country in the world, I think, still on the imperial system, or maybe there's one other, and everyone else is on the metric system. We haven't standardized COVID cards either. And so some have QR codes and some don't. And I'm talking about COVID vaccination cards, by the way. So what this company wanted to do is they're having people email COVID cards. And they wanted to be able to process the COVID card, get the relevant information off the card, and also detect if it had a QR code or not, thinking that maybe someday there'd be a government web service or something where they could actually send the COVID card QR code and validate it. Now, I personally hope that COVID ends and goes away and all this crap goes away long before that ever happens, but it's a really interesting use case, even thinking about QR codes in another maybe use case. So that's what they said. And they said, for now, let's just detect if there's a QR code or not and get all the info. And then the last step was storing the QR codes to their intranet, which fortuitously happened to be Microsoft OneDrive. And so this was their use case end to end. And as those of you know, I think you probably know, since it's a DC Power Platform user group, you're probably very familiar with the fact that the Power Platform can do this out of the box. It has Outlook connections out of the box. We have AI out of the box and Power Automate out of the box. Everything we need to do is on the Microsoft platform. So what happened is I got these cards, and I'm going to do things. I'm going to try not to share too many screens at once. And I apologize for the small resolution. I tend to use, I have two 32-inch 4K monitors, so I use a crazy resolution because I have so many things open all the time. I'm sure you all do that too. So this is a subset of the COVID cards they sent me. Now, a couple of caveats here. When you train builder models or object classification models, the more images you use, the better. And so this is a very small set. I did 5 and 5, honestly, because I just didn't feel like creating dummy data for like 50 cards at a time. I was kind of lazy. I only created like 10 of the non-QR codes and 5 or 6 of the QR codes. And this isn't even the set I use to train the model. This is the set we made available to customers because they're uniform. These cards are all the same and these cards are all the same. When I trained the model, I actually made them all different. So these are the cards that the customer sent me. And so I don't know if you're all familiar with Custom Vision at Microsoft. So this is a site where in the past you could train classification models. And something I worked on, and I actually got a grant from Microsoft to continue working on this, is this one, and I called it Berry Bots. And there's a reason, this is a story, so I'm spinning a story here. So what happened with berry bots is I live in Florida, and strawberries are actually the #1 crop in Florida now. They've replaced oranges. But detection of diseases in strawberry plants is actually a very manual process. They actually send people walking up and down the rows of plants and picking out diseased plants. So my friend, who was the president of the Florida Growers Association or something, we were talking about this one day, and I came up with this idea to create an AI model that could detect disease in strawberry plants. So I trained it, and you can see here, if I do a quick test, and then let me see if I've got an image here, I could just drag and drop here, analyze, and let's just pick one of these. And it's now the AI model's trick. And you see that it returned a 99% probability that there's frost damage in this plant. So when this COVID thing came in, what I did is I went to customvision.ai and I started training my COVID classification model. And I did a very simple one. I did cards with QR, cards with no QR, and trained my model that way. Now, I'm sure you've all used AI Builder, so you're probably familiar with the fact that there's all kinds of drag and drop components. So in AI Builder, there's actually a component that connects to Custom Vision AI. Well, don't you know it didn't work? And the reason why it didn't work is because on my demo tenant, I'm connected to one Active Directory. What's the one on Azure? Azure Active Directory. And this is under my Hotmail ID. But there's a but, and it's a very good but. Microsoft actually bought a company and has folded it into the Power Platform called Lobe. And what Lobe does is greatly simplifies the creation of object classification models and automatically updates them or uploads them to AI Builder for you. So if we start up Lobe, you'll see I created my model, and you'll notice right away the images are different. That's because I use these images to train the model. And I only use 2 very simple tags. And again, caveat here, this is not enough images for production. I wouldn't try to go to production with 5 and 5, but it was enough for the demo. So you can see that these images were very simply tagged no QR, and these images were tagged QR because they all have a QR code of some kind in them. Then after I trained them, same thing as we just saw on customvision.ai, I could say use, and then I could say export, and this is where it becomes a heck of a lot easier. All right, what am I doing here? I just click Power Platform, and it exports our model to AI Builder. And so that just makes our life so much easier. And you can see there's all kinds of startup projects here. This is a great product, and it's only going to get better. And when you're doing object classification, it just made my life so much simpler. So once I click the export model to AI Builder, I go onto the Power Platform. Oops, that's the wrong screen. Sorry. And there's my COVID QR model. So if you're not familiar with AI Builder, the way it works is it's got several out-of-the-box models that you can use. And I'll pull that up and show it to you. So there's things like processing of business cards. There's things like, there's actually a model in there for practicing identity documents. So you see all these models here. These are pre-built AI Builder models ready to be used. There's a forms processing model. There's category classification, object detection, image classification, which is a preview. And that's what I built, is an image classification model, but I used that COVID QR model that I built in Lobe for my image classification model. And as I said, the beauty of it is when I just exported it from Lobe, it shows up in AI Builder, just no problem at all, just right there ready for me to use. So when I click on that in my model, you'll see that it pulls up some information here, and it just tells me about the model. And it's got 13 images, 100% correct. There's 2 labels, and I can, just like I did with the other one there, I could do a quick test. And this time, my folder is better named, and I can just say, let's see what happens there. And well, again, there's my tennis background coming out. Roger Federer is this COVID vaccination card. It's processing the card right now and running an analysis on it. Da, da, da. And it's funny at Microsoft, they don't give us the best demo scenario. I don't think we get the best hardware and software. That's reserved. The high throughput is reserved for the customers. So that's why there's a bit of a delay there, though. But you see that it was analyzed correctly as no QR. So what I've got now is I've got an image classification model ready to tell me if the card it's analyzing has a QR code or doesn't have a QR code. So when we use it in AI Builder, of course, we can have two paths, one for a QR code, one for not a QR code. Really, really simple. And yeah, I tell you, that's some of the beauty of Power Automate too, is that it's all drag and drop, and it's so simple to use that it really does enable, if you've heard the term Fusion Developer, it enables these Fusion Developer teams where you've got people like us, or me, I don't know what your background is, but I assume this is a technical group, and maybe not, apologies if you're not, but I have a double degree in computer science and computer engineering, and so I do a lot of programming and really kind of what I call kind of low-level stuff, and these kinds of solutions are aimed at also for bringing in business users, or what we call citizen developers, to form what we call fusion teams. So some developers, some business users who together can create the strongest solution possible, because business users bring that perspective of knowing the problem they're trying to solve. And when they're on the same team as the developers, you lose that error that comes in when business users try to explain to developers what they want, and then developers try to code it, and then they show it to the business user and they say, that's not what I wanted. And they go back and forth about 1,000 times, and maybe finally at the end they get something that approaches what the business user initially had in their mind. With these tools, we can actually give our customers the opportunity to build those tools as a fusion team, and it leads to a much stronger solution and faster, and of course, easier to maintain going forward. So that was my COVID QR model, and you see it's got that little icon there. The next thing I did was a COVID card, and this is an AI Builder forms processing model. So I used two different AI Builder models here, object classification and forms modeling. And if we look back, I should just leave that COVID card open. So I'm going to do that. Give me a second here.
So while you're pausing there, John, one question is, why did you not just use AI Builder on its own? Why did you use Custom Vision and Lobe?
I didn't use Custom Vision. I only showed Custom Vision to show that's the way it used to be. And so that's a very powerful solution as well if you're not using this. But Lobe is what creates the model that the AI Builder classification model uses. So it's like kind of like the data set behind the AI Builder classification model.
Yeah, but can't you build the model just in AI Builder?
I think you can with, I don't know if you can with image classification, because it has to have some kind of, but there are the other models like forms processing and category classification and text sentiment. You can build those on their own without Lobe.
Got it. Thanks.
Sure. So what I did here, the first step in a forms processing model is what fields do I need, right? So the fields I picked, you can see here are selected fields. I made a list. And so I said, and I didn't put header in this one, but I made a list of fields like header, which is this right here, last name, first name, date of birth, first dose company name, first dose lot number, second dose, same thing, dates, and then where. And I just made all this data up. You can see this just says John Doe. And I created my selected fields list from there. Sorry, wrong one. And if I go here and say unpublish. And by the way, when I was at Blue Prism, we had a thing called intelligent document processing called Decipher. And this is kind of like Decipher, but it's easier. So what am I doing here? I got to... So I unpublished. Now I want to edit my model. And it's creating a new version of the model for an iteration. One thing to know about AI Builder is that the more training documents you give it and the more times you train it, the better it gets. So that's one of the things with AI Builder is, so let's say you use only 10 documents and you're not getting the results you want, do 10 more in the model, unpublish, retrain it with 10 more and see what kind of results you get then. And it should get better and better. The AI will learn as you do more and more models. So what I'm going to show you here is, okay, there's my field list. And if I wanted more fields, like let's say I wanted to do middle initial, and simply say add field and say middle initial. For now, I'm just going to leave my list the way it is. And I still use pen and paper. I actually wrote that out in, well, pencil, not paper, before I did this. And then I say next. And the next thing is a collection. Now, for this particular image collection, I only did one collection. Really, if you think back to the COVID vaccination cards, there's this one, and there's the one with the QR codes. That should probably be 2 collections. And you see here it says add at least 5 sample documents for each collection. So at least, it's the same as when you buy a PC and you say, what specs do I need? And they say, well, you need at least this much. I always double that immediately. It's the same thing here. At least 5 sample documents. I told you this is a demo, so I used 5, but the better the documents, the bigger the number of documents, the better your results are going to be. But what you got to do now is, we've got our field list, we've got our documents. Now we have to what we call tag them. And this is where you really start to see the magic of AI Builder, because what it does is it actually lets you just point and click and select fields and map those to the data. So these are all done. As you can see, I've got all these check marks, but let's just undo a few here. And I think actually it's over here. Remove tag. And let's say remove tag, remove tag. Okay, so here's my document. And the first thing I want to get last name. So this is a simple thing. I just go boom. And now it asks me, what field do you want to map? Boom. And now it's highlighted in green. So that field right there is now mapped to the data field last name. Same with first name. So this one's a little bit different because it's not getting it in one. So I simply draw a box around it. You can see I got a little bit of a space there. I could correct that later. For now, I'll just leave it and say that's first name. And then for header, I do the same thing. And now I just call that header. Now all my fields are mapped, and you can see this gets actually a little bit tedious. I'd like to see a better way to do this, but honestly, with Decipher, the solution from Blue Prism, it's exactly the same. You have to do this and just go through it. And once you go through all of the documents in your collection, they all have these check marks. Sorry, and it's just loading the next document. And once that's done, you're ready to go to the next step. Are there any questions about that? It doesn't matter what the document looks like. You can define the fields, whether it's like an invoice or a vaccination card or a driver's license. You go through and define what the fields are. One caveat I'll tell you is that in the iteration that we're at right now with AI Builder, it does not like blank fields. So that's why all these fields have dummy data in them, because we're not quite at the point where this could be blank and I could highlight this space and it would map to a field. So it does have to have some kind of dummy data in it. It doesn't matter what it is because you're only using it to map.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Is that's a one-to-many kind of a relationship there between the person and the number of doses they got. Is this going to simply strip it into a flat file, or is it smart enough to figure out that it's a one-to-many?
Because I mapped it, it'll figure it out. And what you do with the data is completely up to you.
So all the doses will end up in a child table somewhere?
It actually ends up in a variable that you can then put in a table, and we'll see that in action in just a minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pretty slick.
Yeah, Nelson, I think your question was about parsing out those specific values, right?
Yeah.
So it looks like in this fields list here, there's like a first dose location and second dose location. So it looks like those do come out kind of as a collection of values that you could then, store however you want.
Yeah, you'll see how it comes out.
Okay, thanks.
Next step is I just click train, and obviously I trained a version earlier, so this is just going to train again. So now I'll show you, while that's doing that, I think I can jump in and start showing you the actual automation. Let me see here. It's going to say it's doing this.
And John, I don't know if you answered this or not, but Sandy had a question about handwriting. Is AI Builder able to decipher handwriting?
It is. Now, keep in mind, you're going to get varying results with that, right? Like, because a lot of people have chicken scratch. So chances are you're going to get poorer results with handwriting than you are with typing, but it does work with handwriting, and that's getting better all the time too. By the way, that's a differentiator over Decipher. It does not do handwriting. So I'll just publish this. And while that's doing that, I'll jump to my automation. Now, this automation is super simple. So if you've seen Power Automate before, it simply flows, and all of these are components. So this is where we see the power of the One Microsoft again. This automation is set to kick off when a new email arrives as a trigger. Now, a better way to do this would run this automation on a schedule. So all automations are triggered, and apologies if you all know this already, but triggers can be things like an email coming in, or a SharePoint document is updated, or a schedule. So for something like this, having it run every time an email arrives is okay. I would probably prefer to do this on a schedule. So let's say for an organization, you set up a mailbox, say with vaxcards@microsoft.com, and everyone is sending Vax cards in. We have what, 230,000 employees, I think, including contractors. If it runs every time an email comes in, that might get a little dicey. It'll do it. The cloud will do it, but it might. I don't know. I just don't like that solution. I probably prefer a batch solution where we would schedule it to run every day at 9, 12, and 5 or something, and then it processes all the emails that came in at once. But that's completely up to the business case. But the key is that there's a multitude of triggers. Triggers could even be like web services or any kind of trigger you can think of. In this case, I'm just saying when a new email arrives, and I kept it simple. This is a demo, so of course I made it work for me. Include attachments, look for the subject filter COVID vaccination card, and process with attachments. So when that email comes in, this new automation will kick off. Then I just did a few variables. So variables in Power Automate are just like anywhere else. They're just used for storing data. The file name is a string. What that's going to be used eventually is to build the file name that stores in OneDrive. So here's my OneDrive, and you can see I've got these cards stored already. So that's going to be the file name to store. And then I've got a QR or no QR message. Because that web service for sending QR codes doesn't exist, for the demo, all I did was say, if it's a QR code, have the message that's sent in the final email say, yes, there is a QR code. If there isn't a QR code, don't send a message that says there isn't a QR code. And then what happens is it goes into a loop. So this is a very simple loop. Programming loops are pretty standard across programming. Loops are what makes programs powerful. And it'll process all the attachments it finds. Now, in this case, there'll only be one. And this is where we start to see the integration of AI Builder and Power Automate. So AI Builder is simply a step. It's when I click add an action or add a step, I simply search for AI Builder, and it's preset, get info from the attachment. This is where I say use the AI model that we imported before, the COVID card, and it's going to process on a form type of an attachment, it's content type, and it's going to process the attachment. So all that's doing is passing in the information to the AI Builder component, which AI model to use and what to process. The next step is a condition that simply says, is this a COVID Vax card? And what I did here, and whoever just asked that question about data, this is where you start to see the data. So that header value is an output from this step right here. And you can see when I click on that link, all the previous steps can be used as inputs. So the outputs from previous steps can be used as inputs. And these are all the data values that are pulled out of that document by my AI Builder model. Now, one thing to know, if you start playing with this stuff yourself, you see how there's, wait, where am I here? There's header. And then as I go down, there'll be header value somewhere down here. Header value, you have to use the value term, not the header term. So all I say is, check the header value and see if it contains the word COVID. Very simple if statement. If it does, we continue processing. If it doesn't, we just stop. Now, something to know here with automations is that this isn't a production ready automation because I didn't do a flow for the what we call the unhappy path. So every automation has a happy path where everything works perfectly and an unhappy path where it doesn't. The unhappy path is actually more important, believe it or not, than the happy path, because as you start to scale, if you have automations that don't have an exit in the unhappy path, then you get all these orphaned automations out there that don't complete, nobody knows what happened, and they just kind of hang. You don't want that. So you always want to have an unhappy path, even if it just says send an email and close down and just exit gracefully. Again, it's a demo, so I didn't put too much time into that, but in best practices, you should. let's just look at the yes path. So if the header contains COVID, we know it's a COVID card. This is where I use the other AI builder model, but this time it's pulling in the COVID QR model and it's analyzing that image to see if there's a QR code in the attachment. The next variable pulls the prediction from that AI model. So it says, and you can see as I mouse over it, it says outputs, is there a QR code? And it's pulling the prediction value from this component right here. And it's going to set that to the variable QR. And then this variable here, it simply does string concatenation. So anyone who does any kind of programming or probably anything, even in Excel, is probably familiar with string concatenation, which is simply pasting strings together. And what I did here for file name is I did a concatenation. So it's a custom value. And what it's going to do is grab the inputs. And this is kind of a long one. As its input, it's going to use the info from the attachment from the output of first name value and then last name value and tack on.png. So for Roger Federer, what that's doing is simply building a string Roger Federer.png, John Doe.png. That's all. And all it's doing is building that as a file name. The next step writes that file name to OneDrive. So it fulfills that customer requirement of saving the document. And then I've got another condition that simply checks, does the QR variable have the word no QR in it, or does it not? If it doesn't, we know there's a QR code in it, and my message simply says the COVID vaccination card has a QR code. On this side, it says the COVID vaccination card does not have a QR code. It taps in the first name and last name values from the prediction model, drops down here, and sends an email. And the final email simply sends an email to Alan, who's our COVID administrator, saying the COVID vaccination card for, in this case, let's say John Doe, it would say John Doe was received. It'll use that message that we built here and paste that in the body of the email. And then these are all the variables that you were asking about from the AI builder model. They actually show up here as variables. And so I just said, here's the information from the COVID card. The first shot, product, lot, site, and date. Second shot, product, lot, site, and date. And then I put a link to the OneDrive central folder. And that's it. That's the entire flow end to end. And so when I talk about this with customers, what I really try to stress is that the ease of use here is just, I can't overemphasize how a citizen developer can get involved with this. I mean, even if you just wanted to do something like adding a new step, and a lot of times I don't go into this with customers because I just don't know what their level of comfort is with this kind of thing. But let's say we just wanted to create an Excel spreadsheet with that same information. It's as simple as this, just creating a worksheet and then adding a row onto the table. Everything is pre-configured and comes out of the box with Power Automate when it's Microsoft products. And if it's not a Microsoft product, there's usually what we call a custom connector component to connect. So I know we're getting really short on time. So what I'll do is I'll just run this and let you see it run. And that's pretty much the end. So with Power Automate and an email trigger, the only way to get it to run is to send an email. So what I'll do is I'll say test, and I'll say test it manually. And I don't think I changed anything in the flow and saved it. So it should still work. I hope I didn't break anything. This is just a test system anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
While that's running, a couple questions in the chat, if you don't mind. Can it read a Word doc or PDF, or does it have to be an image?
I think it can do PDF doc, not yet.
Okay. Cool. And then Jenna has a question. If a card is submitted without the second shot info, how would that show up in the final email? Just blanks? Just blanks? Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Great questions, everybody.
So here's my really simple email. What we see on the Power Automate screen is just this spinner that says, I'm ready. So to see it work now, it says send a new email to your inbox. So I'm just going to do this email. And I've got a COVID card attached. And you see it just says, here's my COVID vaccination card. It's from John Doe. You'll notice I set the subject to the subject that the automation's looking for. So when I say send, this will take a few seconds now. Again, we don't have the most high-powered demo systems. So we'll see that come in a minute. This is running. And
So you mentioned citizen developers. When you're talking to customers, what's the story you tell about citizen developer that seems to resonate the most?
Well, there's estimated to be a need of 500 million apps in the next 5 to 10 years. And there's a shortfall already of millions of what I call hardcore or computer science educated developers. And so what a lot of companies realize is that they can't hire enough people and or train enough of their people on C# programming or C++ or Python to fill that gap. And so the idea of taking someone who understands the business and letting them learn products like this and become citizen developers, it's extremely enticing to them. They get a lot more productivity out of their people. The people are a lot more committed to the solution because they're helping to design it. So, oh, by the way, the email came in and you see the flow ran successfully, all the check marks. They're not just handed a system that they had no part in designing and developing and told, use this. Because 9 times out of 10, when they're told that, it doesn't work the way they think it should work. When they have citizen developers involved, they really set up these systems to work the way they work. And so it does make their lives easier. So it's a big, big value statement for them.
That's great. And follow-up question, Aiden asked, what part of this do you think is most challenging for citizen developers?
Well, I think, what I'm showing you, and if you're technical, you're probably thinking this is pretty easy. It can be daunting. Even though everything's drag and drop, learning about fancy words like object classification and artificial intelligence and category classification, that can be a little bit daunting to them. But at Microsoft, we've got, I'm sure you've seen all the online learning docs and these 101 tutorials. And so they can really go through this from the very beginning and learn it. But it is a lot to take in. I mean, coming over from Blue Prism and learning this new platform, it's a lot. And I've done, geez, I don't even know how many courses I've done on Microsoft Docs since I started, but it's a lot. So there's definitely a curve, but it's definitely not as difficult a curve as me handing you a book on C and saying, go learn that. Where is it? Okay, so we see the flow ran successfully, and I got my email. And so the email says the COVID vaccination card, oh, I got a spelling mistake there, does not have a QR code. That's right. And the information has been verified. Of course, we didn't verify it. We're just saying we did. And then there's all the information that was parsed from AI Builder. It replaced all those variable placeholders with all the info from the card. So 100% accuracy. And then I've got my OneDrive. If I go back here, I should have I guess I didn't have to refresh. There's my johndoe.png card. If I click there, it should show me the card. And that's all it does. But where I'm starting to see some traction with things like this too is, I don't know if you've seen the return to work solution from Microsoft, but I'm showing that to a customer tomorrow, and they really want to see this COVID vaccination add-on for that because they've started doing vaccination tracking and they like the idea of this too. But as I said, I really hope all this COVID stuff goes away and makes all this kind of moot. But a couple other things I'm working on right now are invoice processing and human in the loop. So an automation does so much and then a human does verification. It's just, this stuff is what I call the art of the possible. And there's so many things you can do with it. It's a very exciting market, in my opinion. And so it's just tremendous value for customers and a lot of fun, I think, for people to learn. And it's just one more tool in your tool belt. So I hope that was informative. And you do have the video, and I actually just did another video on this. And of course, then there's the blog post that literally steps through everything I did, step by step by step. And so if you wanted to follow it along as a hands-on lab, you can.